Intellectual Property is proudly brought to you by Adams & Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.
Welcome again to the Intellectual Property Show with me, Stefan Lamprecht. In one of our earlier episodes, I interviewed Alan Lewis from Adams & Adams about the commercialization of intellectual property. Alan is with me again today to continue with this topic. Welcome back, Alan. Welcome to the studio.
Hi, Stefan. It's good to be back with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Alan, just to remind our viewers, I think last time our conversation went about the fact that intellectual property is an asset, and for an asset to be valuable, you need to do something with it. So just remind us again, what is the purpose behind commercialization?
Well, as you correctly say, intellectual property should be an asset. However, an asset that is put in a drawer and forgotten about is not worthy of the name. An asset is something that should result in benefit to the owner, whether that owner is a private individual or a corporate or a government. If the asset is just buried or neglected, it has no value. So, as with any other asset, the intention should be to maximize the return on that asset.
So I've gone through a process, I've developed something, a new brand, or I've gone through a marketing strategy. Some people now take notice of who I am. Now I need to go and do something with that brand, otherwise it means nothing.
Correct, and as we discussed in our earlier program, there are various ways of doing it. You can manufacture, you can utilize yourself, or you can license others, or you could sell it. There are a number of ways. What I'd like to deal with in today's program is to approach it at a higher level, at a somewhat higher level, and that is to look at the implications and look at it from a strategic point of view. I'm involved in an organization called the Licensing Executive Society, and it is the belief of the LES, as it is called, that intellectual assets should be approached strategically. And that is the way you've got to structure your thinking from a strategic point of view. Strategically, the entire portfolio or the entire implementation, creation of intellectual property in an enterprise should be approached strategically.
So it's not just about registering patents. It's way more than that. It's about taking the whole process from the creation right through. Just elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, there are the various levels, the various entities within a business, starting right at the top from the management down through the various levels, and the intellectual property should be strategically implemented in all the levels of the business entity. And it's not something that can permeate from the bottom up. It has to be driven from the top down. In other words, the chief executive has to buy into it. The chief executive has to understand. The chief executive must be aware of what can happen. And a wonderful example is what happened with IBM. In 1990, IBM received the paltry sum, and I emphasize paltry sum, of $30 million in royalties.
For a billion dollar organization.
In 1993, they acquired a new CEO, and he had a much better vision and a much better understanding, Lou Gerst, and he changed the entire thinking within IBM. And nowadays, IBM's income from royalties is $1 billion. So that is just an indication as to what can be achieved with a paradigm shift in thinking as to how IP should be aligned within the strategies of the organization.
So would I be right in saying that, the lesson from IBM and the Microsofts and those large companies, and in South Africa as well, if you look at Altec, look at some of their results, then it's very much about moving away from just protecting and securing IP so that we can tick the boxes, towards saying, but how can we actually take these intangible assets and generate benefit beyond just the fact that we've got a paper that says we've got a patent or or a similar form of intellectual property?
This has been dealt with a few years ago, and there are various levels that have been proposed in regard to intellectual property. So right at the bottom is what is called the defensive level. In the defensive level, IP is approached and considered from a defensive point of view. We are going to be manufacturing something, we want to protect it and put in barriers to entry against any of our competitors. That's the bottom level. The level above that is what is called the cost approach.
Okay.
In acquiring intellectual property, primarily as well patents, there's a cost associated with it. There's a cost attached to maintaining a patent portfolio. So the next level is what is called the cost approach.
Okay.
So now you have this body of this portfolio of intellectual property. It's costing you money. So now you start weeding out and deciding what do you need, what is important to the core competencies of the core values of the entity.
And importantly, it's got to fall within your budget. So you can't just blindly go and register patents and file patents and so forth. You've got to say, what is the return on investment going to be? Can I afford to take this approach?
Dead right.
Okay.
The next level is the profitability level. That it's approached as not only as a cost center, but now as a profit center. So you're now maximizing or increasing your return on investment by leveraging your intellectual property. Merely having it there as a barrier to entry, you're now using it to generate income. And as I said earlier, in the IBM model, it can generate substantial value and substantial revenue for the organization.
Just in a South African instance, I mean, IBM, huge organization, been around for probably most of a couple of decades. But do you see this kind of approach, the profitability approach, also in South Africa? Are South African organizations moving up there?
Unfortunately, my grey beard demonstrates the number of years I've been involved in this. And unfortunately, I don't believe there's any.
No.
The closest that we have, I think, is Sasol. Sasol, I think, is approaching it strategically with a view to generate revenues. If we can then move up to the next level is an investment level.
Okay.
And then we get right to the top, which is the visionary level. And that is where the chief executive or the management comes along and says, where would we like to be? Where would we like the organization to be in 5-10 years' time? And how do we direct our intellectual property or the creation of intellectual property to put us where we want to be or where we would like to be in 5 or 10 years' time? And that is the apex, that is the pinnacle that the visionary or the forward-thinking organizations overseas, the direction that they're trying to go in.
Just as a final brief question, do you see more and more an increased awareness in terms of taking such an approach in South Africa amongst South African organizations?
Very definitely.
Okay.
Since 1994, we've joined the world stage and we're starting to learn to play the game according to the world rules, national rules.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks for this insight, and thanks for joining me again in the studio.
Thank you very much. Good night.
So there you have it. Managing intellectual property is not just about filing patents. It's about building intangible assets, protecting those assets, and most importantly, maximizing a return on investment. From me, Stefan Lamprecht, it's good night until next time.
Intellectual property was proudly brought to you by Adams and Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.